Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. So welcome, everyone. Today, I'm so very excited. I have been waiting to do this interview for so long. We have Jane Eisner joining us. She is an incredible journalist. You may have seen her doing interviews with President Barack Obama, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She has done so much work as a journalist and was also the editor-in-chief of The Forward. She's also the author of Taking Back the Vote, Getting American Youth Involved in Our Democracy. So basically, she has done a whole bunch in our world for good. And very excited because she has written a book. It is the very first biography of the iconic Carole King. And the book is called Carole King, She Made the Earth Move. And I believe she still does make the earth move. So welcome, Jane. How are you?
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm excited because, Carole King, to me, she is just a force to be reckoned with. And she's so full of soul. Her music, her songwriting is, I think so many people do forget that she was a songwriter in like a men's room for so long before we got to hear her voice, right?
That's true. When she first began writing songs that had some notice with her first husband, Jerry Goffin, she was often the only woman in the room and certainly the only mother. And so she had this kind of dual status because on the one hand, she had enormous ambition for her music, not so much to perform. She really didn't want to do that, but to create and record music. And yet, at the other hand, she became a mother very early in life and ended up having 4 children and really felt the pull in both ways. And, she was a child of the 1950s, and women didn't do what she did. They were expected to be homemakers and maybe write a few ditties on the side. So she had that in her background too. And I think that characterizes the kind of depth that she brings to so many of her songs because she knows what's it like to be pulled in different directions.
Yeah, different directions. And I think I think she has a lot of love and passion and compassion. I say both because passion is a little bit different than compassion. She's got like a fire under her, even when we look at her political life. And one thing we've done so much about 10 years ago, we've done, and we still continue to do it on our Nature Connection show. We've done a ton on what's happened with our wild horses. And here she comes. Carole King, she really was a huge advocate for saving our wild horses, which 1974 was the Velma Act. They're federally protected to be managed and taken care of on our public lands. And this was back in 1974, signed in by Richard Nixon, which has not been the case, actually, she's been a real advocate is what I want to say. They do all these roundups and it's pretty gruesome what happens to our wild horses in this country. She's just been this amazing advocate for making sure that they don't get rounded up. It's just an ongoing battle and it's going to get worse, So I think what she's done for the environment has been incredible.
Well, she grew up in Brooklyn, and that's where the first stage of her life took place, and that's where her music was created. And then she moved to Los Angeles and was a part of what is known as the singer-songwriter movement. And then she just kind of threw all of that away and moved to Idaho with her third husband, and then stayed there, even marrying again. And to this day calls Idaho her home. And I think that, as you said, causes of the environment, of preservation of the Rockies really became important to her. She hasn't created songs in a long time and rarely performs anymore, but she does pursue her advocacy.
And then there was the Broadway show, the Tony-winning Broadway show, Beautiful, that came out. So that kind of put her back in the spotlight. And I'm so excited about this because I love that there's a biography of her out because I want the younger generation to know who she is and to not give up hope and understand that I feel like Carole King is always just redoing herself in life. It's like she just keeps reinventing and doing what she wants to do. And like, okay, 4 marriages, right? And you can keep going. Don't let one thing, take you down, basically.
Well, you're right. I do think that the Broadway show Beautiful, which, received Tony Awards, really did introduce her to a whole new generation of women. And my book is published by Yale University Press as part of the Jewish Lives series that have been continuously published now for many years. And I'm delighted to have a big Jewish audience. Jews really care about these things. But I really wrote this book for everyone. And in my mind, I thought about a woman in, I don't know, Kansas or Iowa or far away from either coast who has always loved Tapestry and other albums from Carole King's work. And she goes to see a regional production of Beautiful, and she brings her teenage daughter along, and the teenage daughter falls in love with the music. And then it goes from generation to generation. And I really wanted to speak to all of these people so that they could learn more about her life. I tried hard to dissect the genius of her songs and to really explain them. And also just to reach people who might not ordinarily know of her, either because it can't be, generationally or according to geography. And from my experiences so far in talking about this book, there's just a broad fan base, and not just of women, but a lot of men care about her music too.
Well, she's one of the ultimate songwriters that we have in the world. Like I put her in the top 10 of that as a songwriter, and her voice, she's got this very endearing voice of honesty, and you want to listen to her. And, I mean, she wrote for Aretha Franklin, or Aretha Franklin sang her songs too. But so Aretha's a different kind of voice. But we were talking about this because we just recently drove through Idaho, and I was telling my mom, Nancy, we travel the country and we document parks and public lands for one of our publications and podcasts. And we were driving through Idaho, and I'm like, this Carole King land, we're in Carole King land, gearing up for this conversation. And we were talking about Carole King, and I'm like, this is like songwriter heaven. Look at this. It's got this rocky, it's like this, it's such a rugged landscape and yet so beautiful. And we were talking about her voice, and actually yes, playing Tapestry. It's that album is like, again, one of the top 10 too in the world. And we were talking about her voice, about how she draws you in to hear a story. And actually, when I think about her, I think she's a storyteller. It's songwriter,
You're
but storyteller.
You're so right. And, I'm glad you brought up her voice. It's not astonishing the way her peer, Barbara Streisand, had this amazing voice. But I think what draws people to it is its authenticity. She sings, You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman on Tapestry. And that song was written for Aretha Franklin. And obviously there's nobody in the world who could have sung it the way Aretha did. And yet Carole King had the guts to sing it her way. It's much slower. It has a different tone to it. And, she must know now that she didn't have this conventionally trained voice. And yet, because she's singing her own songs, I do think that I keep coming back to this word, but authenticity. Um, mostly there were times when she veered off this path, but mostly she was who she was. She didn't pretend to be anybody different.
Mm.
And that was really new then, because, the first era of her musical life was what's known as the Brill Building era in New York, when music production was very atomized. Somebody wrote the music, else wrote the lyrics, somebody else produced it, somebody else performed it. And that was one kind of structure. It was fantastic while it lasted. Amazing songs came out of that. But when the sort of centrifugal force of American music moved to Los Angeles for all sorts of reasons I can explain if you want, she became a singer-songwriter. So she reluctantly at first began to perform her own songs. And that was a huge change for her. Now, you see these clips of her performing in London before 60,000 people or something. And she's obviously owns the stage. I saw her in concert with James Taylor about
Oh, wow.
now 15 years ago, and she was amazing. I think that's what characterizes her voice, and that's why it's easy to sing along with, and it's kind of easy for it to stay in you because it's not like a voice that you could never yourself replicate unless you're blessed with those kind of vocal cords. But it is a voice that is beautiful in its own way and is very relatable, I think.
Yeah, and the beautiful that song, when I think about that song, that is one of those, you get up in the morning and you listen to it and move
Yeah.
forward. I think she had a very I think she almost wrote her own mantras at times to keep going.
Yeah, I think so. And, you think of a song like You've Got a Friend,
Mm.
which there's some story that she wrote that in response to James Taylor's song of Fire and Rain, where there's a real kind of existential loneliness in that song. And You've
Mm.
Got a Friend is the antidote for that. And, I think there's so many reasons why it's amazing, not just because of the sort of affirmation of friendship, but also underneath it all, and this was something I didn't really appreciate until I did the research for this book. Underneath it all is a very interesting melodic and structure and chord changes. So in the beginning of the song, when she's laying out the problem when you're down and troubled, the melody is in a minor key, which makes you feel sadder and more troubled. And then when she presents the resolution of that problem, you just call out my name, she switches to a major key. And perhaps people more brilliant in musicology than I picked that up a long time ago. I never did, and I must have sang this song 1,000 times. But it's subtle, and at least I did not pick that up until I started to learn to play the songs and understand them. Even in a song like that, which seems so simple, there's more musicality to it than you might think. And that's another reason why these songs stick, because they're not just simple ditties. It seems to me that these changes from major to minor or minor to major and her chords structure, which she really loves chords, they make you feel something that maybe you didn't know you felt until that moment when you heard it. And also those feelings are universal. Everybody's lonely.
But she's playing the true craft, and it is crafted. I mean, she's the craftswoman. So I'm not going to say craftsman. I refuse. She's a craftswoman, and she's got the sensitivities and the dynamics, and the minor to, majors is all about dynamics. Some people do it in beat and measure and volume even, and more or less instrumentation. Dynamics is like this huge, it's like part of, your tools as an artist, of how to do that. If everything's all the same all the way through, you've lost the emotion and the feeling. And life isn't
Exactly.
that way. And I think she
Exactly.
mimics life, and she brings it back out going, oh, I got you here. I understand this story. You're going to relate, and we can all relate. And the power of chords is unity. It's a form of harmony through instrumentation, especially of piano, because it's still a string instrument, but it's still this unity that it's unity to me, because it is a form
Mhm.
of harmony when you're playing a chord. To me, that's how I look at it. And I think that she represents that in her music. She wants you to feel something and also move forward. Everything she does to me is about moving forward. You could be somber, but let's be somber and then stand back up. And she's just always stand-up person that way, I think. She's a little fighter. She's a toughie. Don't mess with her. You
Mm.
know? That's kind of
Well,
how I feel.
I think you are pointing to something else that distinguishes so much of her music, which is, I think, a kind of optimism.
Mhm.
So even when she's singing about a terrible breakup, it's too late. The song doesn't end with the heartbreak. The song ends with a hope, there'll be a time again for me and you, but we just can't stay together. So she's hoping that she and the partner that she's leaving can still find love.
Mm.
And I think that's very important. Sometimes our optimism is um, naive or kind of obvious, and I think it feels kind of blander in that regard. But that's when she has these kind of universal songs. But when she can be specific, I think it really rings through. I mean, one of my favorite songs, not on Tapestry, is "Been to Canaan," and in that song, she's really imagining a place, not some faraway perfect place,
Mhm.
but just a place that's in nature, that feels calm and wonderful. And, or even a song like Up on the Roof. Jerry Goffin wrote those lyrics. She wrote the music. And again, they're talking about a kind of problem, and then here's the solution to it. You go up on the roof and you're far away from the street and the noise, and it's a place for contemplation. And then the last verse is about you can join me too. So I do think that this sense of resolution is very important, and you hear it in a lot of her work.
Mm. When with this also looking at, Jewish lives, right, through Yale, and their press, it's this series I think is really important, especially now. And the immigration story, the immigrants coming into this country, it's so important. And you do delve into that, her family history of coming here. And can you tell us a little bit about that research that you found of that you put in the book? Because I think it's so timely. And I think that sometimes our ancestry comes through us through DNA, right? That we may not know. And maybe she was carrying songs of the past to the present. I don't know how to explain that. Sounds woo woo, but I do believe we feel things from the past in some way. And music does that. Music is the storyteller of the times, too. Just like journalism is so important. Thank you very much for all you have done, Jane, as a journalist, because journalism is, my gosh, the watchdog of our country, right? And our world. And it's so important. So I really appreciate that with what you have done. And I appreciate the arts
Thank you.
because the arts tell the truth too. And I feel like these two entities are your go-to. And through history, you look at journalism. Yes, there's been, some weird stuff in old school newspapers. You know what I mean? There's, come on now. There's some weird stuff out there, but there's true journalism that I'm talking about, like, and what you have done. And then at the same time, the arts tell the truth of the people. And right now we're being challenged on all of this. So again, I just have to give you a shout out for that, your work. And I think, with her history, her family history, I feel like, anyone coming over here it was not easy getting here. And everyone came here for a reason, right? And I don't know, maybe that reflects in her music. What do you think?
Oh,
Family too.
absolutely. So,
Yeah,
first
yeah.
of all, you're right that I think the immigrant stories is very important in her life. She grew up in a neighborhood that, like her family, were the children and grandchildren of immigrants who fled political oppression, economic, social, and like so many others, thought that America would afford them the chance to break free from that oppression and then create new lives for themselves. Her mother's mother seemed very, very important to her. And the mother's mother, her grandmother, always desired to play piano. She grew up in a poor and could never afford one, but she really pushed that idea onto Carole King's mother, Jeannie. And, Jeannie had musical talent, but she, was a homemaker in the 1950s. And even if you have that kind of talent, mostly what you do is, give piano lessons. So there was a lot of kind of generational push towards music. Even at a very young age, at 4 years old, Carole started to play piano. And so she continued this generational love of music. I also think there was something else that she took forward from her parents and grandparents, which is um, just an ambition to do well or even very well in this country. And I mean, sadly, uh, the doors are closing for so many immigrants right now, and that sense of possibility is really draining from the country. But at that time, in the mid 20th century, it was something that could propel you. So her father was a firefighter for New York City, and there weren't that many jobs available in municipal jobs for Jews, but there were a lot of Jewish firefighters. Not only did they think it was a good thing to do, but they kind of looked at it as a ticket to the middle class, or at least the lower middle class, because it was a steady job and one that people respected. So, yeah, I think that she did hold her immigrant background in her.
I really do too. And I think, again, it's also looking at who comes to this country and look at how much they've given to this country. If you
Yes.
look at Carole King, she gave a lot to this country, and people around the world. Music, it's transcendent. She'll never see the full ripple effect of her music. It's
Yeah.
impossible. Thank you so much for joining us here on Big Blend Radio and for writing the book. Everyone, again, you can go to janeeisner.com. The link is in the episode notes. Again, it's by Jane Eisner. The book is Carole King, She Made the Earth Move. Thank you so much, Jane. I appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.